And I'm excited to introduce Juan. I think that for people who are here, he probably doesn't need an introduction, given what's happened today, but I still will for those who may not be as familiar with the space, maybe following online, but he's the inventor of IPFS and the founder of Protocol Labs and Filecoin. Filecoin raised $200 million back in 2017. That was one of, if not the largest DePIN raise before DePIN existed. And it really was kind of an original DePIN project. And Juan studied computer science at Stanford before building and conceiving of building and inventing IPFS. And I think Filecoin just celebrated its 5-year anniversary in October, right? So congratulations for that. And we're thrilled that Juan and the team chose DePIN Day for their launch of Filecoin on-chain, so on-chain cloud. So really thrilled about that. And so maybe want to give Juan just a minute to kick it off by talking about the launch today and kind of the implications for Filecoin, for the ecosystem overall.
Yeah, and thanks for having us. Super excited to be launching this here. First off, DePIN Day has been an awesome gathering for the industry and the community. I think a whole bunch of really critical conversations on how to use these kinds of networks happen here and almost nowhere else. And so this is a major way of advancing the design, productionizing, productizing, scaling, research of DePIN networks. And so thank you for running this event over time, and very excited to be a part of it. Yeah, so we thought that this would be a fantastic place to launch the Filecoin on-chain cloud, which is a major development in the Filecoin platform. It has a whole suite of components and primitives to enable the building of cloud services using Filecoin proofs and using the storage systems that Filecoin has amassed. So Filecoin is the largest scale decentralized network by a very large margin. It has a level of scale that is able to compete with centralized cloud storage providers, and you can build compute networks on top of and around Filecoin. And so for whatever reason, this had been hard and clunky in the past, and it was difficult to build certain kind of more specialized storage products. Like when you think about storage as a system or a market, it isn't a single product. There's a whole bunch of sub-products to storage. If you're trying to store a kilobyte or a megabyte, that looks completely different than if you're trying to store a terabyte or a petabyte or beyond. And so each of those kind of segment into different sort of storage markets. And so before, Filecoin had been targeting that wealth of storage markets as kind of one thing. And so the Filecoin on-chain cloud is a major shift that enables specific products and services to be built for each of those different kinds of markets, and for things like computation networks to be coupled together closely to that storage so that people can bring compute to the data, and you can kind of scale the storage. And one personal favorite thing about it is a lot of us have been working on a bunch of primitives for over 10 years, building a whole bunch of decentralization and verifiability primitives, things like IPFS hash linking and decentralized discovery of the content, and censorship resistant pieces of software, and being able to take individual artifacts and make them discoverable entirely peer-to-peer. And Filecoin has been the incentive layer to back up all of that kind of data. But we hadn't yet fully connected Filecoin to the entire pinning story in IPFS. In IPFS, the idea is you have content and you pin it to specific storage services. And so there's been a major thing that one really cool product that you can build with all of the new primitives that Filecoin on-chain cloud gives you is this kind of IPFS pin component, and it's like a very neat kind of solution that kind of brings the entire story together and ties up all these primitives. And that's kind of one of the major ways. IPFS pinning today is the main way that all of the DeFi protocols and a ton of dApps out there store and maintain their front ends. So the main way that lots of organizations and lots of groups access their decentralized applications is through IPFS websites that they usually have to pin somewhere, usually in some centralized service. And so now this enables the full decentralized stack to actually work, where your entire dApp is decentralized, the systems that are storing it are decentralized, the verifiability and the gathering, like finding the content is decentralized. And so this is enabling that vision to be a reality. Like one of the major next things that I would love to see is where that entire stack is fully encrypted at rest by default. So the entire website itself would be encrypted, and like that's kind of forthcoming stuff that some people are working on.
Well, listen, just to carry that point a little bit further, we did a fireside chat last DevCon in Bangkok, and so that was a year ago. Why don't you talk about what has maybe you've been impressed about over the past year, what's disappointed you, where you think we should be going or maybe not be going as fast as you would like?
Yeah, it's a great point. So, I guess a year ago, it's like November 24, we're like, I guess, coming out of the bear market. The market was kind of like recovering, not yet a quite bull market that kind of happened after. Maybe something that I think was really good and really healthy is that this bull market in crypto was very weird bubble speculative in a sense. Like most of the communities that I talk to and most of the chatter that I see in a bunch of places is much more oriented towards the fundamental value that a bunch of systems are providing. There is some like overly speculative types of things in some corners, but it's nowhere near the past bull markets that have been incredibly kind of like rampant speculation on things that you can imagine not having long-lived value. So I think that's a sign of the entire industry maturing and getting into a point where most of the large capital pools and capital allocators are starting to focus on systems and infrastructure that actually generates strong cash flows. And it's been super healthy to just see a lot of groups being like, okay, so you have like a large decentralized network with a token, but like what value are you providing? What service are you giving? Who's using it? What are the revenue flows? Like this is just so healthy for this entire industry, and something that I think is going to be this strong optimization pressure that will push all DePIN networks, but especially these amazing DePIN networks, into providing very high quality products that people actually want. I think the industry was ill-served by a lot of capital allocators between 2018-19 through 22-23 that were pushing instead for like much more mimetic-oriented things where like, the story was like, cool, you're doing a bunch of hard work, but like, what's the narrative? And it's like, dude, like, it's entirely about the value that you're creating. And yeah, I love the YC style, make something people want. And there's a lot embedded in there. It's not just something people need. It's something that ideally people are asking for, that the market is seeking. And so we're finally, I think, getting to the point where DePIN networks and networks in general are being forced to actually find stuff that people want. And that's super, super healthy for the entire industry.
Yeah, listen, we certainly see that. You see projects merge together. We see pivots. We see all of this and in a search for users, for traction, because the market's demanding that in a way it didn't, 3 years ago, whatever, even pre-24, right?
Yeah, and I think these adjustments, happen slowly and then suddenly. It's kind of you start seeing them happen and then quickly, like the world sort of like shifts and reallocates. And so I don't think that full reallocation has happened yet. I think it's becoming a lot more rational, but it's still not there. And a good sign of that was the panel earlier today when people are talking about like, oh wow, like Glow is adding all this solar and it's like super cool, and or like these other networks that are creating a lot of value, and it just seems like really irrational that like the KPIs are going up and like the value is going down. Like what the hell is going on? And like that's like when a lot of people start saying that, that like the shift is starting, but it hasn't happened yet, because if it had happened already, then like those two would be correlated. And so this reminded me of an old Amazon thing where Jeff Bezos has this like great quote about how like after the .com bubble, the Amazon stock plunged like 98% or something from the high to the bottom, and they could see internally with all their dashboards that all of their KPIs were getting better. Like the customer, like the amount of customers were growing, the sales were growing, the revenue was growing, like the margin they were getting was growing, the network effect was growing. Just like every aspect about the business was improving, and yet the stock was bottoming and like plunging down, like and so on. And he has this very good phrase of saying, the company is not the stock and the stock is not the company. And so the application here would be, the system is not the token price and the token price is not the system. Those two could actually remain decoupled for a while, for a period of time. But if your system is well designed, over time, those will correlate and those will kind of unify. And so one of the big things there is like, groups working on these kinds of systems should internalize the kind of J-curve mentality of venture and realize that like, wow, these like amazing assets are like on massive sale relative to the future. Now you have to pick well, like, not everything is gonna have a J-curve, right? For every Amazon that succeeded, there's a bunch of other companies that didn't. And so you have to like understand well like which ones do have a strong promise into the future and whatnot. But it's just kind of like a phenomenal event where you have these incredible infrastructure projects that can scale globally, can help boost the infrastructure in all kinds of aspects of life, everything from digital cloud systems to solar energy and power plants and like telecommunications infrastructure and weather infrastructure and like just all kinds of stuff. And we can build like this super permissionless, verifiable infrastructure that anyone can contribute to, that anyone can add stuff to, and kind of staff, right? Like this is, if you were sort of describing this idea to people building the infrastructure networks in like the middle of the 20th century, they would have been like, what? This is amazing. How do we use this magical technology that lets us organize people globally, like millions of people globally, with just like playing with some numbers on and some like code on a system? Like that's amazing. Like they don't have to like do all this like super other hard stuff of creating a whole bunch of companies and employing a lot of people and like training them and so on. Like this is just totally kind of an amazing way of summoning infrastructure out of the internet. And we just have to build the value flows, have the discipline as builders to focus on creating value, understanding where the products actually serve the users, what people will actually pay for at what scale, what is the revenue that is coming in, bounding. I would really like to see a set of healthy improvements in kind of tokenomics where people start bounding the cost structure and the emissions by the inflows and the revenue flows that are coming into the network, so you can have sort of like balance the books in a sense. And see, I think there's been a lot of like good proposals on how to evolve these systems, including things like the glow zones kind of thing. How do you have different economic structures across different parts of the world, and how do you give participants in the economy some say in kind of where the network gets built out? I think that all of these, there's kind of like a whole zoo of really cool DePIN mechanisms that we're all exploring, that we're kind of inventing in a bunch of places, and that is refining an amazing toolkit for how do you build tons of interesting infrastructure projects at scale. And it's still like kind of like a lot of the stuff is still kind of clunky, right? Like building these networks is difficult, deploying them is difficult, launching these projects and networks and tokens is difficult. But it's a lot easier than it used to be, and it's going to keep getting refined and refined and refined to the point where suddenly being able to build and operate and scale one of these kinds of infrastructure networks is just quite smooth relative to what it is today. And that then is going to enable us to apply this DePIN framework to a whole bunch of other types of problems that are not yet possible. Like for example, one of the things that I want to be able to do at some point is do like an internet satellite communications ISP thing, kind of like Starlink, but with a DePIN type of network. Now, of course, doing that is like pretty hard for a bunch of reasons. You end up with like basically one launch company, unless like which happens to be a competitor. Hopefully, you can get like some other launch companies involved. Actually competitive. But you should be able to kind of have an amazing ISP globally and then go direct to sell in a few years. Like maybe let Starlink figure all the hard problems out and then like be able to be like a really good fast follower. And you could do something like that, but there's probably a bunch of stuff that we in the industry have to keep developing and improving before you could really start something like that. And one of those things I think is also capital formation. So we had a bunch of, you mentioned earlier, kind of the scale of token of raises of the different DePIN networks. This is where I think like the crypto industry has gone astray, mostly because we had like this super aggressive kind of like regulator who was just trying to run the entire industry into the ground and destroy it. But now that that's gone, then we can actually build good capital formation tools that are native to crypto and native to these systems. Just one other thing that you should remember is like VCs get a lot of value, and I say this as being somebody who invests a lot of capital as a VC. VCs get a lot of value by sort of being the the groups that get to understand and pick what are the projects that are good. And so the product that VCs offer to the market is that they help investors who know less about the industry to be able to pick well. And that makes sense and has a role. But what that sometimes turns into is not necessarily picking because they know better, but picking because they gatekeep, they manage to take the round and gatekeep anybody else being able to get in. So that's where there's a misalignment between VCs and kind of the more traditional token native fundraising systems. And so, it wasn't just the SEC being super anti-crypto. Also, a lot of VCs did not want token sales to work because then they get disintermediated, right? And so, there's kind of like this possibility now where now that the regulatory environment is very different, we should be able to redo token sales in a much better structure that actually serves as a signal, doesn't let a bunch of crap and bogus things get through. Maybe uses prediction markets or other tools like that to assess what are good, which ones of these will likely be good, and have some way of being able to do on-chain capital formation at scale, because that's much more native and better. And it would, if we can figure out the structure, it would also help us figure out how to do all the financing of all the large capital build-outs. Like, for example, you were talking about, Glow has kind of figured this out for solar, but if you want to do something much bigger, like a nuclear plant, or like a major kind of infrastructure project like that, you should be able to use some amount of crypto native capital formation tooling to do that globally. And how do you do that well, smoothly, compliant in all the relevant jurisdictions? That's an interesting hard problem that is not yet figured out. And I think it's a good challenge for us to do. And if we can figure out a good path there, then we'll be able to not just kind of incentivize the supply and kind of govern these systems totally digitally, but we'll also be able to do the entire infrastructure build out, right? Why aren't we using crypto to do the massive data center build out in the world to power all the AI data centers globally? Why is that still being done in a bunch of stupid PDFs and I don't know, just super slow agreements instead of going to a much more open public market directly, kind of to the world. So anyway, but here's a whole bunch of thoughts on both stuff that we need to improve and kind of where I see the landscape evolving.
Well, let's distill that down to, first I have to return just quickly to the Amazon point. In 2014, I remember talking to one of the most sophisticated family offices in New York who would not invest in a fund because that fund held Amazon stock. And they said, we cannot possibly invest with someone who would buy a company that's losing money. So that is literally not, I remember the meeting super clearly.
Yeah,
and it's very hard to resist reminding that investor of that mistake again and again. But sorry.
This is, I would just have an intense visceral reaction to this. There's this expression in economics that, the market is efficient and all the good trades are done. Couldn't possibly be more wrong. What's going on is that the market is just so confused that you can't get the market to act rationally. And so you might have a good idea, but you might still lose all your money because the market's not going to follow your rational perspective. There's so many capital allocators around the planet that are sitting on huge piles of capital and make terrible decisions, really, really bad investment decisions. And by the way, it's this entire system is partly propped up by the regulatory regime of the 1930s. You don't have a good way of very easily connecting really good knowledge about all of these potential investments with the end users or consumers of these investment products, and innovating in that landscape is incredibly red taped. It's just one of the most red taped areas in all of history. Maybe nuclear engineering might be more red taped, but comparable. And this is why we have incredibly bad capital allocation, don't invest in Amazon when that turned out to be one of the best possible investments in 2014, right? Let alone 2004.
Right, no, but it wasn't even how it turned out. But you could see, the point is you could see metrics. It wasn't you didn't forget hindsight. You could just see metrics back then. But the place I wanted to go was scale and deployment, and you touched on it in those earlier comments. What's holding back the crypto ecosystem from being more scaled, more deployed, more kind of globally relevant, I would say. Because that's really where I think, if you think back to where you were 5 years ago or in the first raise of Filecoin, if you thought, okay, we're going to achieve all of this I would have thought, and we all thought we'd be further advanced in terms of global adoption. So where do you think we are? What hurdles need to be?
Yeah, and I have a point to return to later about, and I'll do this after, of like capital allocation again, and how I think it's going to change a lot over the next 5 years. I think a lot of these crypto networks, and this is especially true in DePIN, scaling some parts of it turned out to be, not easy is not the right word. It's like straightforward. It's still hard, still a lot of work. People have to grind it out, but you can scale some amount of the participation really quickly. So the supply side, famously in DePIN, is fairly straightforward to do. However, it's just hard enough to do that then teams get fooled into thinking of that's the hard part. Like that whole thing is like the game, yeah. And they don't do the generating of the demand and selling the product extremely well into the market. And because you can like very quickly scale the supply without focusing on the demand side, and because we have an entire capital system that enabled that in a sense by enabling a lot of groups to kind of fund a bunch of these projects without having the demand side metrics to show, basically like crypto has not been held to the same rigor that SaaS companies are held to when they're trying to like raise Series A's and Series B's in terms of the revenue numbers. And so I think like if we can apply very strong optimization here with the capital that will be coming to these networks, in directly connecting it into the revenue flows that these networks are making, that will force the optimization for the teams to actually focus on solving this. Like I think that's part of the issue. Like when teams can take when teams get advice or are told by their communities that they should focus on narrative instead, like they then go do that, which is a much easier, shorter term thing to do, and they aren't fundamentally solving the core problem. And so that might work for a while, but it doesn't work fundamentally in the long term. Like in the long term, you have to get the underlying fundamentals of the thing correct. You have to provide an extremely valuable service to groups that are going to pay for it. And if you don't have that working really well, then like the whole thing is not going to go well. And so I think that's the thing that I think has been holding us back. Like we have been able to scale these infrastructure projects to global scales involving thousands or in some cases millions of people, scaled up supply massively, scaled up the productive capital. Like this is not just the financial capital, which can scale quite a bit, but the actual hardware build out, the people involved in operating these systems, the software, like all of that has kind of been able to be amassed and improved and so on. And it still hasn't hit very good connectivity to the actual use cases and the dependable kind of value flows and the customers that are going to pay for this. One special hurdle that I think could be maybe circumvented more easily is there's a lot of kind of Web 2 non-crypto systems that just kind of like can't really reason about crypto very well. They don't want to hold wallets. They want to use credit cards. They want to use wires. Like they can't handle the crypto super decentralized systems. And so a very straightforward thing to do here is to, in addition to having the Web3 infrastructure, build a companion Web 2 business that is basically an adapter for the Web 2 world. And so you can think of this adapter business, and like that just sells the crypto Web3 product in a way that the market can understand. And that Web 2 focused business can take credit cards and do wires and all of that kind of stuff. It's just that it doesn't provide the underlying service. It uses it like subcontracts out to like the entire Web3 system. And some structure like that I think can work extremely well for a number of the DePIN networks that are out there. And then that group should deeply understand what the customers want, what their feedback is, and should drive optimization of the product below to kind of to do this. And so I think like that has been if we can do that, I think we'll be operating better. I think another issue has been just the coordination difficulty of when you have a large-scale decentralized network and many teams and they have different priorities and so on, how do you organize and coordinate these groups around roadmaps, shared goals, kind of delivering on certain market needs and all of that kind of stuff? I think that can be harder. I think our industry has improved on this in the last couple of years, but I think it's still hard. The point I wanted to make about capital allocation, which I think is interesting, has to do with the future. So in the next, like the most important thing that's happening right now on the planet is that humanity is like building artificial intelligence that is more capable than humans. Like this is kind of, it's been happening over the last 10, 15, it's happened for a long time, but especially in the last 10 years. And when you sort of project that out into the next 5, 10, 15 years, you should expect that a lot of things about the world are going to start changing very dramatically. So one of those things that's going to change is capital allocation. So we just talked about how there's a bunch of funds that have a bunch of capital that like make really bad decisions. Turns out the way that all of those decisions are made are entirely digital now. All of this stuff happens over like Google Docs or like writing docs or email or Zoom calls or whatever. It's all digital. And it's perfectly placed to be completely upended by LLMs. And so the moment that LLMs can show they can do drastically better capital allocation than the current people, like you'll see this major shift in how these capital allocator pools start allocating capital. So they may become dramatically more rational very quickly. And so we might go from a world where you have 1,000 very large-scale funds that won't invest in Amazon because they don't understand it, to 1,000 super well-capitalized funds that are now deploying on the cutting edge of the most important, most valuable stuff. And I don't know how fast that'll go. I hope that happens quickly, but it could take something like 5, 10 years to happen. But I would be very surprised if like 10 years from now that we aren't just in a dramatically more efficient capital allocation world. And that could happen very quickly. Like it could be 2, 3, 4 years. Because there's just so much value that you get out of allocating capital better globally. Like this applies to governments, applies to sovereign wealth funds, VCs, like all kinds of investors will just, if they can ratchet up the quality of their investment decisions, there's just massive optimization pressure for that. I'll also want to mention a project that I'm super excited about. I guess two that I'm super excited about in the near future. One is Glow that you already heard about. Being able to apply DePIN to scaling energy use is amazing, and especially renewables. Like, it's so cool that what David said of saying, wow, if like everyone on the planet held $10 worth of Glow, the incentive pressure for building solar would be so strong that we would build all the solar capacity that we need globally. Like, that's an amazing statement. Like, being able to do that, like have the network to be able to do that is like fantastic. Let's focus on growing that. Like, that's such a good path. The other one I want to mention is a project I'm getting more and more involved in, which is BitRobot. So along with AI, which is going to be a major shift, the next, or one of the important things we'll need to be able to do is we'll need to be able to have fully robotic embodied systems that can do a lot of production. And you've probably seen how in the last year alone, there's been a dramatic increase in the investment in both the US and China for the build out of humanoid robots and like small like dog-style robots and drones. Unfortunately, a lot of that is kind of like military application sort of oriented, where like there's a buildup of robotics infrastructure because the US and China are kind of like tussling, and there's also like the Ukraine-Russia war, where a lot of some of the stuff is being tested and used and so on. But the broad point is that as AI systems get more capable, we're going to solve the hardest problem that has been holding back robotics. Like when we grew up with stories, sci-fi stories, talking about the friendly robot and like the Jetsons, where Rosie the robot would like do all the things and like take care of the kids and like was like this awesome partner in life and like family member, and like that is becoming possible now. Like we are in the threshold of now having robots that can do that kind of work. We already have self-driving cars that do a super complicated path planning and navigation system, and the big unlock there was not the processing, the computing power, which definitely helped, but it's not the biggest improvement. What helped there is having the data collection infrastructure to gather the data required to solve that problem. So the thing that's holding back humanoid robotics from starting to automate production and construction and so on, so that we could, because imagine if we automate production and construction, we can then start like producing way more food, producing way more buildings, way more like higher quality living places for like dramatically cheaper costs. We could be like making all of the requirements. If you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, all of the things that people need in like the lower rungs, like food, shelter, like ability to communicate with each other, like all of that sort of stuff, we could be producing at massive scale super cheaply once we have the robotic infrastructure to be able to do it. And what's holding us back from doing that isn't the hardware anymore. Like the hardware is there and sufficient. What's holding us back is just having the software capability to do the mobility of these systems, and to be able to like rely on a robot that can like navigate a space and can like, go and cook an egg for you. It turned out that like dramatically easier to get an AI to like compose a symphony and like do a huge fraction of your job than to walk in your kitchen, close the dishwasher, like crack an egg, make you an omelet, serve you some food, and like do all of that without like destroying the place or like harming anyone. But I predict that this problem will be solved in the next, I think like 5 years is probably the right time frame. It might take longer. It could be 10, but the highest probability mass for me is kind of like between 2 to 3 years and kind of 6. So I think like 5 years is like a good boundary. And the problem is about kind of how do you collect all this data and kind of amass a training infrastructure environment for it. And this is where like crypto can do this in a way that maybe traditional infrastructure players have a harder time, which is you can build a DePIN network to amass a robotics hardware and run the entire training loop of piloting these robots at scale. Because if DePIN is good at one thing, it's amassing scale of supply. And so you can amass a supply of robots and the supply of teleoperators that can like pilot the robots and then kind of organize the robotic data collection process to then start improving the mobility algorithms to then be able to like serve a bunch of users. So yeah, this is like, I think we're in this moment where crypto is going to start powering robotics and AI and so on. This is like the BitRobot network that is kind of doing this. Very Filecoin inspired and connected to Filecoin. Like we're talking about taking all of the data coming out of that and like directly connecting it to the Filecoin storage. So I think the world's going to be very different in like 5 years, 7 years. And I encourage all of you to like spend a bit of time thinking ahead 3, 5, 10 years out and plot a course of like how all of these things are going to change and how do you best position yourself, your organization, your industry, your community to take advantage of like the amazing boon of productivity that we'll have, and kind of also share some of the wealth creation that will happen as a result.
Well, listen, I think there's a number of DePIN projects that are actually out there collecting data very useful for robots, whether it's the data in cars from HiveMap or what Demo, whatever, or kind of the phone data collected by a whole number of phone-based DePIN networks. They all have potential to sell that data to robotic kind of training modules. I think the one thing that I want to close with is your investment in community. And so for those that don't know, Protocol Labs is a sponsor of DePIN Day kind of overall. So they're a sponsor for this, helping us put this on. These are community-driven events, right? These are not profitable events for Fluence. We do this for the community. We can't do without people like Protocol Labs, without Filecoin, the Filecoin Foundation, and the other sponsors we have. But Protocol Labs has been a core contributor in terms of content and in terms of capital to make this go on. But it's not just this, right? Protocol Labs has invested in, I think, dozens of projects in the DePIN space. They also host their own events across the world and have for many, many years. They hosted, DePIN dinner for founders last night and other times. So we're thankful to them. The whole community is thankful for all the effort you put into community. And I think that just the last question is to think about community, how you started kind of investing in that and how you sort of see that and how you kind of suggest other people engage community.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks for mentioning that. Listen, I think at the end of the day, people that care about solving hard problems also want to do it with people they really enjoy spending time with and want to learn from and want to connect with and want to help. And I learned an enormous amount from many communities over time. So like schools and universities and open source. And so I've been kind of like very community oriented for a long time. Internet communities, I was like very early to the internet, and so just kind of hung out on the internet all the time in lots of different like random esoteric internet communities. And so I've always been very keenly aware of the amazing value that communities bring to people, to their lives, to the meaning that they get, and also to projects and teams and so on. And especially when you think about learning or helping each other and so on, community structures are super, super valuable. And so I've built projects like IPFS and Filecoin and Protocol Labs itself to be very community-oriented and network-oriented in nature to create a structure that can bring a lot of people along, bring many organizations, support the growth and development of people. And we're kind of like leveling that up now where we have a whole bunch of infrastructure that we're building in Protocol Labs to support the growth of the people and the communities. And think of like small low-hanging fruit, connective tissue, and systems that we can build that can help people help each other more. So it turns out that most people are very, very helpful and friendly, and especially if there's like a good karma or good expectation that the help you give is going to be returned, like there's a good kind of pay it forward sort of system in place, then people can be super helpful to each other. And so we're building a whole bunch of structures and systems around that in Protocol Labs, everything from office hours and introductions and mentorship and advisorships and all of that kind of stuff. And so yeah, if you're interested in like joining an awesome community, like come join us there. We're trying to like accelerate R&D in all kinds of ways and do it and having a lot of fun with it. So yeah, come join us.
Fantastic. Listen, let's give Juan a big round of applause. Thank you, Juan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.